Hello everybody and welcome to the finished art tutorial. Finished art is a necessary evil. For those of you who are not familiar with what finished art is, it's generally a process of cleaning up the job before it's ready for print. So it's basically halfway between designing and and pre-press, so trying to prepare it for print so that everything is ready to go and the printer doesn't have any issues. Admittedly, on the printing end, there will be changes, there will be adjustments to the design job, and that'll obviously be to do with the printer. But in terms of doing finished art is basically making the job easier for the printer so they don't have to file through this really poorly set out piece of design in Illustrator or one of the other programs. So what you'll find is on the blackboard you'll see this. This is referred to as the checklist or the finished art checklist. If you're in the advanced diploma, you'll probably see one that says Add Dip, Essay 1 checklist, and if you're in the associate degree it'll say ADEG, Essay 1 checklist. So disregard the fact that there's an associate degree of graphic design in the corner here. If you're in the advanced diploma, the same checklist applies for both of you. It's a universal sort of checklist that I set up just to make sure that you can get in the habit of doing finished art for print. So yeah, let's get into it. So this is one of the documents that you'll see in the week whatever it is. It'll depend on what you're doing, because obviously this FA checklist can work for no matter any time that you're setting up a job for RMIT. But for the purposes of this is just for the Summative Assessment 1, so we're just going to go through it for that. If you want to use it later down the track and you're like, yep, I'll use this for Summative Assessment 2, or even just another setup that you're doing in Illustrator, go for it, because this is a pretty good little checklist that we got going here. So the first section is the die line. The die line is obviously what we've already had a handle on. You've already had a chance to set up your die line, you did that early on, and now we're returning to the die line to try and consolidate the design work that you've been doing throughout the entire semester, and fusing that with the die line. So everything's coming together. So everything's coming together now, so that it's finally going to be set up for print. So in order for me to sort of explain a lot of this stuff here in the checklist, I've got some older works from a couple of students. So you can see here that this one is washing powder that one of the students set up a couple of years back now, and this one is chocolate. So this one's your food and this one's your non-food, and you'll notice in the checklist that this first page is dedicated to the food and the second page is non-food. So if you're doing yours for food or non-food, obviously it'll just depend on the one that you're doing, but I thought I'd run through them concurrently so you get a chance to be able to see all the different elements that you need to try and tick off. So firstly, you got your measurements. Pretty straightforward. You can see here that the measurements have been set up on a separate file. A lot of you will be familiar with how the measurements were set up from the die line. If you haven't, or you didn't do that in your die line, I would have probably recommended it in the comments, the feedback that I gave for the die line. So jump back onto the blackboard and go to the results section so that you can read any of the comments regarding your die line, but you will need the measurements. The measurements help to show exactly where things are. And you can see here that this student's done a really good job of setting it out, because he's put lines to indicate exactly where this measurement falls between, as well as the measurement in millimeters. So make sure it's in millimeters. Make sure you've got the line indicating the actual width or height of the panel that you're measuring, and also a stop and start. And you can do that with arrowheads if you want. You don't necessarily need to draw these sort of lines here and do them manually. You can just add arrowheads so that at least I'm familiar that you're familiar with knowing where exactly those sections are And same with this student as well. She's set it up on a separate layer there. She's obviously got the arrowheads going on for the line, as well as the almost the starting and stopping bookended lines there as well. So you can do it how you wish, but either way, both these students have done a good job in indicating clearly and concisely where their measurements are. So they'd get a little old tick on the checklist. The next one is the die line itself. Now remember, if you remember back to the first couple of weeks, there is a legend for that. And what I mean by legend is that there's a color. So you need to make sure that this color is set to the cyan spot. So the blue, just 100% cyan, set to your spot color. If you need a refresher on that, you can go back to the die line tutorial, because that one gives you enough information and gives you enough about all of this. But it's just to clarify exactly what you'll need to make sure you've got 100% this time, because it's going to be marked. So the die line layer, in this case, this particular student hasn't done the die line in the cyan and instead done it in magenta. And it looks like it might have actually been, I might have set it up as a different color for last time. So disregard the color that this is in this particular job. They do have the die line going for it on a separate file. So he's set it up on a separate file. And in fact, a good way, just to sort of backtrack a little bit, a good way to check your die line, if you're sort of getting confused between the artwork that you've created and the die line elements, and you're going, I can't really see what's going on, turn off your artwork so that you can see exactly what is happening with the job itself. So you can see that, in fact, this particular student hasn't even got fold lines on his work. But if we go to the other student's work, she's done her fold lines and she's done her cut lines. So you can see there that the solid line is the outside, that's your cut line on the outside, and then the dashed line indicates the folds. So make sure they're in cyan. Just disregard the color of these ones. That was a different, an older coloring system where I set it up as magenta instead. So just cyan. Make sure it's 100% blue, 100% cyan, and do your solid line as your cut and your fold line as your dashed. The barcode layer. Now we ran through the barcode already, so I sort of indicated to you that your back of pack needs to have a barcode. You can put it on any side of the pack. It really doesn't necessarily matter where the barcode ends up. It's usually best to put it out of the way. Rarely do you see it on the front of pack. It's not really a feature presentation that you want to chuck on there. However, some more sterile or clinical designs may choose to put it on the front just to add to the concept. But anyway, the barcode itself needs to be on a separate layer. So if you remember back to the die line tutorial that we went through, if you can see here, this student's got the positional barcode in there and doesn't have the grey box. Now, when we went back, if you're going back to the die line tutorial, the grey box that you put in initially when you did your die line needs to be removed. So you're replacing the barcode box, so the grey spot coloured box, with this positional barcode over the top of it. Now there is something that she hasn't done, which you'll need to do, and that's adding what's referred to as a quiet zone. Now, when you've copied and pasted the barcode across from that file that you can download from the Blackboard, all of those barcodes that were laid out, so on your left you had your 13 digits and on the right you had your 8 digits, when you put it in, it will look like this. It'll just have a white box that goes to the edge of everything contained inside. So the top of the bars there, right the way down to the bottom of the zeros, down the bottom and to the sides as well. So it'll be nice and tight. Now what you need to do is you need to add a little 2 or 3 millimeter edge to that so that it's very, very clear for the scanner to be able to pick it up. Now I'll just double check to see whether or not this student's done it, so you can see if he's done it, and it looks like he hasn't either. So what he needed to do was to add an extra edge, and I'll just quickly do it on his so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about and it doesn't seem abstract. So all you need to do is select the outside box, do path, offset path, so object path, offset path. Make it about 2. You don't really need it to be huge. Sometimes you might even just want to do it 1 millimeter, just so that it's got a little bit off the edge there, and then go for it. And make sure that it's also set to the white. So it looks like that. So instead of looking like this when it comes in, you want to make sure that there's a little border around the edge so that the barcode has a bit of clearance room to work with. So you'll see on the checklist here, barcode layer, leave the positional only panel. So in this case, these students were working with an older barcode, so their positional panel looks like this. Your one is text in the center, and it has a bit more information in there, and you'll need to add in your EAN number. So remember how I was saying in class, it'll say EAN number. You just need to insert, where those zeros are, the number that's on your existing pack. So just insert it there. So not down the bottom here, put it in there. So your positional panel will need to include what's called the quiet zone, which you can see there. So 2 to 3 mil quiet zone, and you'll need to leave the positional only panel on there. So don't delete this panel here. Leave it on there because the printer will replace it, and they need to know that it's positional only and not the final barcode. So the bleed layer, you remember the bleed layer. It says chosen spot color, but on our legend on the blackboard in the early die-line tutorial week, you'll remember that it's purple. So you'll need to make sure that your bleed is set to purple. Now, both of these students have done bleed, but they haven't put a line there. So that's not on. What they needed to have done is to have included the extra bleed line. So you can see that they've done their 3 mil. So the 3 mil goes outside of the die line there, and it does actually bleed off, but they haven't put their bleed, like the extension of their bleed there to indicate where that line stops and where that edge of that 3 mil is. So I need you to make sure that you do a solid line, set it to a purple spot color, labeling it bleed, do not print, and make it that 3 mil offset, and put it on a separate layer as well. So you'll have that on a separate layer. And make sure that when you do your bleed, that you have the bleed on a separate layer, so like as just the line. So don't add any artwork to that bleed layer, just keep it so that it's got that line. And that goes for anything in the die line elements. Keep all of the artwork stuff separate. So you can see here that this student has got all of the artwork on one layer, and then the positional only panel on a separate layer. The barcode is what I mean. And then all of the extra stuff above there. So make sure that your artwork is all the way down the bottom, so it's set to the bottom layer there, and then everything else that's part of this this die line section, put in above the artwork layer there. So yeah, as I said, make sure that the bleed is set to a 3 mil offset outside your die line, your cut die line layer, and make sure that it's set to purple. Don't choose your own spot color, make it purple. The CIA layer, so that's your critical information area. You'll remember that as being the information goes inside that space. So you can see there on this particular student's pack, if I turn off the artwork, that she's got it on every panel. Now, as I said to you in the die line weeks, you don't need to put it on every panel. You just need to put it on the panels that have artwork on it. So with these little tabs there, she didn't need to put the critical information area on there, just on the artworking areas, which you can see is pretty much everything else. Arguably, there are probably a few other layers that she didn't really need to put it on, but the most unnecessary layers are these elements, are these little tabs here. So she didn't need to put that on there. And with this student, he's done exactly that. So he's put his critical information area boxes inside only the panels that have artwork, and everything else doesn't have the critical info area, because it just doesn't make sense having a critical info area when there's no info on that particular panel. So when you're doing your critical info area, just the panels that have artwork on it. Glue area. Now this is the magenta spot. So this is your pink color. Now, neither of these students have put the glue area on their work. And that's a big no-no because obviously that just means that while they've got a fantastic die line and it can fold, it can't be glued together. So it's really important that you put the glue on there. There needs to be an indication as to where the printer is going to glue the particular panels that need to be glued. Otherwise, yeah, there's no way to actually put it all together. So make sure that you check your existing pack to know where your glue areas are. I'm sure you've already done it as part of the die line tutorial, but just double check to make sure that you've got them in the right areas and that they glue properly. And if there's any latches, don't worry about any glue for those areas because those ones are obviously supposed to be opened and closed manually and frequently. The use by best before expiry date obviously needs to be that green spot that I was talking about in the die line tutorial. Now, in this case, the non-food product here that this student's done doesn't need it. Most of the time, the washing powder doesn't go off. There's probably like a general, best to use before, but generally speaking, it lasts a very long time, so you don't need it for this product. But for this particular student's product, what she has done is she's put the best before panel there, but she hasn't put the green spot over it. So you need to do both. This best before and then the area for it is important so that artistically and aesthetically there is a space for it. But then what the green spot color will do is indicate to the printer where to stamp after the printing the date that it'll go off. So she's done the first part, which is just the design element for it. So the little white box there and the best before with the semicolon. But she needed to put a green box over the top of potentially this bottom area of the rectangle there, just so that the printer knows exactly where to put it. So you'd put this section here, so the best before and the white box on your artworking layer, but you put the green box on a separate layer called best before. And again, in the same way that you've got all your other die line marks up the top there, you put it up there in its separate layer. So same as the barcode, you'd put a best before layer and then you'd put that little green box in that section there. The job ticket. Now the job ticket is new to a lot of you. Potentially to those of you who are in the advanced diploma, you may be familiar with doing Meredith's Avenues ice cream packaging. If you've done that, you may be familiar with both the markup panel and the job ticket layer. But for those of you who aren't, I'll run through them very quickly for you. You can find these two files here, the job ticket and the markup panel, on Blackboard. So you can download those for yourselves and it will contain these. So you can see in the markup panel there's 2 artboards and in the job ticket there's only 1 artboard. So if we're going through the job ticket first, the job ticket looks like this. Let me just get in on that. And this needs to go at the top of your artwork. So if you have a look at these other students' work, they've got it right up the very top of their job. And same with this guy as well. He's got his at the top. So you need to make sure that you put this in and you need to make sure that you fill it out. So to go through what each of them mean, the job number, will be your student number. So normally speaking, the job number itself is the job number for the studio. So if you're in a design studio, obviously they're working with hundreds, if not thousands of pieces of work. Depending on how long the studio's been running, it can be in the millions. Sometimes, if they're decades or decades old as a company, then yeah, it's quite a high number. For smaller studios, obviously the number is smaller. But in this case, since obviously we're not working in a studio, just put your student number in that space without the S. The file name will be the naming convention. So I think it's 3DDesign _ group A or B _ SA1 underscore last name. So make sure you follow the naming convention on Blackboard for the submission of this one. And then it'll say .ai as well. So your file name will be exactly what your name is up the top of the work there. So you can see here, if we have a look up the top here of this student's work, 3D, so he's got 3D, he's got his group number, he's got brief 1, which has now been changed to SA1, so summative assessment 1, and then his last name. And again, she's got group A, her last name and first name, so she's probably not done the right naming convention. So make sure as much as possible you follow the naming convention on Blackboard, just to make sure that you get that perfect. The version is version 1. In a studio environment, sometimes the versions can go up to 15, 20, 30 different amends. It's just to make sure it's for billing purposes. If there are usually most studios will have 3 free amends with every design job. So if you're doing a design piece of work and it's up to the 3rd amend, then that's all free. And then the 4th amend that you do, so say if the client came back and said, oh look, we checked over the copy and we need to change some of the elements, then you charge them. So version 4 will then be charged. And it also indicates to them what we class as versions. So if they're like, oh, that text shouldn't have been a full amend, we'll be like, well, no, sorry, that was a full amend. So you needed to make sure you got that right in the first or second amend that we got there. The date is obviously the submission date, so put in the submission date for this one. Obviously it's going to be different for each of you, so make sure you check the date that it's due and put that date in this space. So obviously day, month and year. And then over here, some of the students get confused by this one. The acronyms for this are referring to designer, finished artist, and account manager. So you're obviously the designer, and since we're going through the finished art, you are going to be the finished artist, whereas I'm going to be the account manager. So all you need to do is just put your initials in where the X, and T are. So for the designer, you put your initials. For the finished artist, you put your initials. And for the account manager, you put my initials. And my initials are just BR. So chuck that in that space and fill that one out. So don't delete any of this stuff here. Make sure you put it all in and make sure you fill it all out. The markup layer, this one refers to this particular file. So you'll see it, I think it's markup panel.zip on the Blackboard. So just download that file. It contains the fonts and it contains these 2 artboards set up with 2 different versions of a markup panel. So what I'll do is I'll run through the more tricky one first. So then that way you get a chance to see what this one is. This was an older version of the markup panel that sort of got phased out by RMIT. But I thought it was good because it had a little bit more to it in terms of the finished art elements contained inside here. So I thought, maybe I'll bring it back as an option for those of you who want to challenge yourself for the finished art stuff, whereas the one on the other artboard is a little bit simpler. So we'll start with this one just so you can get an idea of the trickier one. So you need to include both. If you're going to put this one in there, you need to include this top rectangle and this bottom rectangle. So you can't just include one of them. You have to copy and paste both of them into your work. And you can set them up side by side, or you can do it like I've done here and just stack them on top of one another. So in terms of the elements you need to fill out, you can go through all this information and read it for yourself. But in terms of the information you've got to fill out, you'll need to put the date on there, which will be your submission date. So make sure, again, you check what the submission date is of your of this summative assessment one, or whatever assessment you're doing, I guess, if you're doing if you've come back to this later. The client name is me, or you can actually put the brand name in there. So you obviously, we'll imagine that the company's come to you and they want you to do this particular piece of design. You can say that the client name would be insert company name. Or if you want to, you can just say Brad Reich, which is my name. Don't worry about the signature. If you want to, you can just put my name again, just to indicate that I've given it the tick of approval. And again, don't worry too much about these radial buttons here. they're supposed to be filled out. In a live studio, this approval would probably be made by the client. So you'd be sending off this proof to the client. They would date it. They would write their name or the company name, sign it and approve it, etc. So all of this is supposed to be printed out, done by the client, but you're going to do it in this case. So date, submission, client name, me or the company, signature, your name if you want to, and don't worry about these last two. Again, going down here to the job identification panel, your brand will be obviously the brand name that you've come up with. The product will be what the product is. So if it's a pasta brand, then obviously the product will be whatever the pasta variant is. If it's farfalle, or if it's spiral pasta or whatever it may be, just chuck it in there. The designer is you, so put your name in there. The file name is the same as the one that you had on your job ticket, so make sure that you put it as 3Design underscore group A or group B underscore SA1 underscore last name .ai. So put that in that space. You might need to condense it a little bit just because that's obviously a long thing to put. The version is just 1, and again the date is the submission date, so same up the top here. Max dimensions are your absolute width and your absolute height. So you need to make sure that you have measured your full existing pack for its absolute width and its full height and insert those dimensions there. The number of colors for most of you will be 4. So don't be confused and think, oh yeah, I'm just printing, printing it once. The process is CMYK, so cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So you need to make sure at the very minimum that you put 4 colors being printed. Now this is one that tends to confuse students sometimes because they think that the spot colors that you create for your die line are counted and will sometimes have like 15, 20 colors in there. Those aren't included. The max number of colors that you're actually referring to are the ones in the design. So if you're including spot colors in your design, so they are not made up out of C, M, Y, or K, but are sourced from the Pantone color book, then you need to add those to your number of colors printed. But I'll go through those when we go to the other markup panel because it might just make a little more sense there. The varnish, most of you will probably have the varnish print. If you're doing it at RMIT and you're using the Epson roll feed printer upstairs and you're doing it on a gloss finish, then you need to make sure you put click the varnish button there. And to do that, all you simply do is select that middle circle and change the stroke to be the fill instead. The proof is at 100%, so you need to change it from the 65%, which it's currently selected as, and change it to the 100%. The 65%, it's not a smaller version. If you've spoken to me and it is a smaller version because you've done, say, a cereal box or a very, very large box that doesn't fit as a print on the roll feed, then you can indicate how much you've reduced it by. But generally speaking, and this is probably going to be the vast majority, the proof will be at 100%. So make sure that you select this and deselect this. In the same way that I said to do this one, just change the stroke to the fill in this so it's selected and turn off the fill on this particular button here. The printing process, for those of you in the advanced diploma may have done the finished art enough to know what each of those mean. Generally speaking, lithographic and flexographic printing, which is this litho and flexo, are the most common printing styles. Gravure is more to do with foiling, plastic bags, and some like Tetra Paks, as in like the milk cartons that you can get, or like your Big M cartons, stuff like that. So generally speaking, the gravure is very high grade print, but it's a high grade print for surfaces that can't actually use flexography or look really bad with flexography, such as your foil bags or your plastic bags. So generally speaking, for this one, since we're doing cartons, you won't need to select the gravure. Flexo is a really sort of cheapish print. and litho is the next one up. So if you want to, you can either choose flexography or lithography. It won't matter. It's just to sort of like indicate to this hypothetical printer that we're sending our job to that that's the print process. So you can either leave it as flexo or change it to litho if you want that better print, but it's up to you. Again, with regards to the process colors, they're your 4 colors. They're your C, M, Y, and K, and generally speaking, most of you will be using CMYK. So you need to keep that on. You need to make sure that that radial button is ticked or colored. Now the spot colors. On this panel, it's split. On the other panel, they're not split. And what I mean by that is that on this particular panel, the spot colors here are referring to spot colors in the design. The spot colors down here are referring to the spot colors that you're using in your die line colors. So for instance, you would put die cut and folds do not print as cyan. So you'd color that with your cyan spot color. Again, glue area, you'd make sure that that was solid magenta. So color that whole box with that. And then you'd also need to include all the other boxes containing all the spot colors that you've got in your job. So you need to make sure that you include them. If you use this markup panel, you need to include these. So don't put the spot colors in here that you're using in your die line. Only put the spot colors in here that you're using in your design. Now, if we just go across to the other one over here, you'll see that there's no section for the die line spot colors. All it's got is this section here for your spot colors in the design. Now, if you are using the spot colors for the design, awesome. Indicate those here and put them into those existing boxes there. And if you've got more, just extend this panel to show more. If you're not using any spot colors in your design, and in your design specifically, not your die line spot colors, but your design, then turn both of those to be blank, and you can delete the PMS XX. Now I'll give you an example from both of these students because they've both done it. So you can see on this particular job here that this student has chosen to put some spot colors in his design. So actually in the design, not in the markups. Not in the die line colors. These are in his design. Now these ones are different to the ones that we created for the die line. So obviously, if you remember with the die line, the way that we did those ones was you went up the top. You went to your color palette. You go create new swatch, you make sure that it's a spot color, etc., etc. So it's sort of, you set up whatever it's called, do not print, and you set it up that way, right? So if you're using it for the design, you need to do a different process for that. So I'm now going to show you how to do that if you want to include spot colors in your design. So to do that, what you need to do is you need to go to your swatches palette. You need to go to the top right corner where it's got the drop down menu. You need to go to Open Swatch Library, Color Books, and then depending on the print process that you're using, so if you want to print on a coated surface, so where it's got a glossy finish and it sort of gives you a shine, then you click that Pantone CMYK coated. Otherwise, if you want an uncoated surface, so it doesn't shine in the light and it's got a matte finish to it, then you go the uncoated. Now, in this case, this student's gone with coated. So I'm just going to go coated, and it'll bring up this cool panel. Now what this panel is, you might be more familiar with this if you're in the advanced diploma and you've had a chance to go through finished art with Meredith, but this is a digital version of the Pantone color books. Now the Pantone color books are universal, so if you're trying to mix a color as a printer and you need to find a particular color that isn't made up out of the CMYK, because obviously CMYK can be mixed in many, many different ways, and if it's wrong, then, or you might mix it one way in one part of the world, and then in the other part of the world it might come up completely differently. This is actually supposed to be a way to make the colors universal. So whether it's printed in China, Japan, UK, Australia, US, doesn't matter. you should be able to achieve the same result. Now, in the same way that I got you to change your swatches to a different view, I'll get you to go up to the top right and go small list view. And what you'll see there is you'll see the name of the particular Pantone color. So it'll say Pantone, whichever it is, and that's an indication of the book number that they have corresponding with it. Then you find the color that you're going for. So in this case, I'm just going to select a random one here. And you can see that what it's done is it's added it to your swatch palette. So now that's over here in your swatch palette, and you can use that in your job. The only thing that you need to do once you've actually added it, other than just coloring the job, coloring the things in the job itself, so whatever you're coloring with your design Pantone color, is to just double click the swatch itself and change it to be spot color, because it'll come in as a process, and you can see there on the right that it's got the CMYK icon, but it doesn't have the spot color beside it. So it comes in as a process color. Now we want it to be a spot color. So you'll need to go into your color type when you double click the icon of the color and change it to be spot color. And what that'll do is it'll just mean that now if I go OK, it's a spot color. And if it's used in the job, you can see it quickly and easily. So there you go. So if you weren't familiar with that and how to do that, you now know how to add design colors. So adding spot colors to your design rather than just making it up using the swatch and color palette thing. Okay, so this is the other markup panel. You've got pretty much the same stuff. So the date, you put the same date in both, so your submission date. Your job number is obviously set to your student number. Client name is me or your brand name. Designer is you, so put your name in there. Client signature, just put my name in that space. And finished artist you'll put as yourself. And then you can see that there's not all the other stuff that the other markup panel has. So if you prefer the simplicity of this one, you can use this one. All you need to do is indicate whether it's set to litho, flexo, and pretty much just stick to those two, I would say. Don't worry about the other ones. Dry offset's referring to can printing. So if you're printing on an aluminium surface, most of the time the dry offset's done there. Other would be digital print or numerous other methods that you can choose. And reviewers, obviously, as I said to you, referring to more of the cartons and the foil bags and whatever. So just stick to litho and flexo, choose one of those and select it, and deselect the one that you're not using. Process colors, as I said, very rare for you to not be using the CMYK in any way at all, so keep that there. But with the spot colors, exactly as I just explained in detail before, only include the colors that you're going to be using in your design, not the spot colors that are part of your die line. So if you're not using any colors, spot colors in your design at all, make sure you have no color in there, and you delete the PMS XX. Just so that it indicates it's like this one over here, where they've got nothing. So there's no spot colors there. So that just indicates to me that I know that you're not using any spot colors in your design. Yeah, so if you have any difficulties with that, because obviously it wasn't something I went through in class, you can shoot me an email and we can discuss it. If you feel like, oh, hang on, do I need it? Do I not need a spot color? Should I be using spot colors or should I just be using process? Shoot me an email if you feel like it's something you want to explore, and we can go through it in a little bit more detail. But for now, most of you will just go with CMYK. Now, this is another one that I didn't mention with your die line, overprint. Now, some of you, as I said, in the advanced diploma might be familiar with overprint with regards to Meredith's finished art class. But if we go back to the other students' work here, the easiest way to indicate whether or not, or see whether or not anything's set to overprint is to go to View, Overprint Preview. Now, what you can see when that happens is that this particular student has set her printer marks to overprint. So the die line lines to overprint. Now the reason that I can tell that she set it to overprint is I'll give you a comparison. So I'll take this one off overprint. Now, can you see the difference there between this line here, this dashed line, and this solid line? The solid line there is obviously what I just changed back to be not set to overprint. This one up here is set to overprint. So if you're familiar with Photoshop at all and you know multiply, the multiply effect, where what it does is it sort of creates almost like turns it transparent and darkens it against the background section there. That's what this has done. So you can see that with this one, it's not set to overprint, so it hasn't darkened against the backdrop there. So the best way, or the only way, to really change these lines to be set to overprint is you need to go to Window, and you need to select this layer palette called Attributes. Now it doesn't seem obvious, but Attributes is actually, whoops, I've just turned it off. Attributes, let me bring it up from out in the bottom corner there. Attributes only has these options in there. So you can see that all it's got is overprint fill and overprint stroke. Now if I select one that's already set to overprint stroke, you can see that it's ticked. If I select this one that isn't set to overprint stroke, it isn't ticked. Now if I tick that, watch as it changes color. So you can see there that it's quite an easy way to tell whether it's set to overprint or it isn't. And if you've got your artwork in the background, it should just multiply, create that sort of overprint effect over the top of the background and do this. And another way to also check to see whether or not it's set to overprint is this funky little feature. If you go to Window and you go to Separations Preview, whoops, again, I just turned it off, my bad. And I'll pull that one out so you can see what's going on. Overprint Preview shows you this. Separations Preview shows you this. Now when it's obviously in the moment it's set to Overprint Preview, and what it's showing there is all the colors that are visible in this job. So it obviously shows you the C, the M, the Y, the K, and that will be your default. So whenever you open this Separations Preview, if you haven't created any spot colors, that's all it'll show. Whereas in this case, this particular student obviously has all the colors that she set up as her die line spot colors. So she's got her critical info area, die line, and measurements. And if you're paying attention, you'll know that you guys have to actually do a couple more than that. So you'll need to include your best before, as well as your bleed in that in there. And there might actually be a couple more. I just can't remember off the top of my head. But then she's got this other one down the bottom that says Pantone P11414, which is her design spot color. So if I just zoom out really quickly, if I turn that off, there you go. So you can see that she's colored her background with her Pantone spot color. And that's what I expect you to do if you're using spot colors in your design. And that's what I mean when I say using it in the design. So that's in her background there. She's actually colored things using that Pantone color instead of just creating her own. Now zooming back into where we were just before, and just to show you the difference, I'll turn off the overprint on this one so you can see, again, this is what it looks like when it's not set to overprint, this is what it looks like when it's set to overprint. Now, if I turn on and off my critical information area, see this area there that wasn't set to overprint? It punches through or knocks the background out. So it creates the dashed line that knocks out of the background. That's another indication that it's not set to overprint. Whereas up here, where, see if I go over the path there, you can't see it because I've obviously turned off the color, but we know the shape's there. So that indicates to me that you've set it to overprint. And this indicates to me that you haven't set it to overprint. So it's a good way for you to check. If you pull up your Separations Preview palette here, you toggle on and off your spot colors just to see exactly what's set to overprint and what's not. So you can see if I turn on and off the die line, it's all set to overprint. There's no area there that's not. Yeah, and so you just need to make sure that you select everything as overprint stroke and check through your separations preview to make sure that it's all set that way. It's the easiest method to go through just to try and ensure that it's all hunky-dory. So that's that. That's everything in the die line. Now, die line you'll receive the most marks for, so you need to make sure you go through that with a fine-tooth comb and ensure that it's all set up properly. The little green lines that are beside this in your checklist just indicate the even more important elements. So if it wasn't to include that, that job would potentially be returned, and you might be charged a lot by the printing company. Or if it is totally printed, and then you find out after it's been printed that you forgot to include the glue area or the use by or barcode die line, etc., then those ones would probably need to be recalled, and again, it'd cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. So these ones are the really, really crucial ones, and it also indicates usually the marking allocation as well. So make sure that you really hone in on the green highlighted areas. Otherwise, most of these in the die line section, you're going to get marked higher than anything else. So make sure you check your die line thoroughly. That's why I went through it in a lot of detail. Right, so the front of pack. Front of pack is obviously referring to all the elements that I put up in the front of pack week as the mandatory information. So brand name, I've gone through a lot of this stuff, but what it provides to you is a checklist so that you can check to see, have I included the mandatory information or haven't I? And sometimes you might be surprised. You might have gone, yeah, I'll include that, or I haven't included that. And for those of you that have collapsed a couple of them under like one category, so for instance, if you had product descriptor and variant name as one item instead of the two separate ones, it gives you a chance to go, have I done it correctly? Knowing what a product descriptor is and knowing what a variant name is, are they okay to be pushed together and become the same thing, or do I need to split them up, etc.? So have a look at these. Brand name's obvious, tagline, again, all of this stuff. The photography, illustration, or texture just refers to something on the pack. I think I indicated in the front of pack week that you needed to include one Photoshop element. Don't stress about that. It's not a big deal. I'm pretty lenient when it comes to this. So if you've got lines and you've got patterns and stuff on there in some way or another, or even just like a background texture of a calico or some sort of porous, fibrous sort of a paper, something like that, it's fine. Just something in there. If there's something in there, it's all good. I imagine that some of you may even have like illustrative type, and that's fine as well. So just figure out something that can fit into that sort of category there. I'm pretty lenient with that. Product descriptor, again, as I said, RTB flash, you need to at least have one. So make sure you've got something on there. If you're doing a minimalist strip back design and you're thinking, oh, I don't want to include an RTB flash, it's just going to make the design look really archaic and too in your face when I'm going for a strip back subdued look. Try and figure out a way that you can include it as just a line of copy. It doesn't need to be in a big bubble or some sort of loud and proud object on the page to sort of indicate to the consumer a reason to buy it. It's just got to be something that they can read, if nothing else. So make sure you have at least one on the front of pack. Serving suggestion, as I said, I've got if needed. So if it doesn't apply to you, don't even stress about it. The if needed is really just, you won't get marked on this if it's not part of it. If you have got product photography on there, you will need to include it and you will get marked on it. But if you haven't got it on there, don't worry about it. And the volume of weight statement is pretty straightforward. So these are the things that you'll need as mandatory items for your front of pack. Go through it, check it, etc. The back of pack and the sides of pack, the reason that I put sides of pack is I only referred to it as the back of pack week, but all of these elements can go on the sides of pack if you wish them to, and there's no problem with that. You won't lose any marks for not having it just on the back of pack panel. So at least have the elements on there from the back of pack or on the sides of pack. No dual facing, as I said, no same face done twice. If you remember back to that week when I was going through the back of pack, don't put the same face twice. Don't put the same selling face on there twice. I want to challenge you to do two. By now, if you're looking at this, you probably already know and you've already started designing a separate back of pack, and that's cool. Go for it. Or sides of pack. Origin statement, I've put if needed. So you don't actually need it as a mandatory item. If needed is just to do with making sure that if you want to indicate to the consumer and be transparent with them that it's made in Australia with local and imported ingredients, go for it. Or anything for that matter. If you really want to, say for instance, if you had a product that was distinctly an overseas product, so it might actually be that you've done an Indian curry. And if that's the case, if you said that the ingredients were imported from India, awesome. That really adds to your brand model because then it shows it and it harks back to that authenticity. So you can add that just as like an added bonus to sort of say to the consumer, hey, it's not made here. In fact, it's as close to the source as possible. But it's only if needed, so it's not really a mandatory item. Company contact info is, as you can see by the little green line that I've got there, totally important. So you need to at least put a website on there, if not the, the actual address, the physical address. You don't need to include that sort of stuff. I know that a lot of you are just, it's a loaded word to put the website on there. So I would say don't even stress about the physical location unless you really want to include that text. Storage instructions if needed. If you remember back to the back of pack week, as I said, the storage instructions refer mostly to, they're really most important for things like ice cream. And if it's not ice cream or if it's not something that's instantly perishable, then it doesn't necessarily matter as much. Add it just to cover yourself. As I said, store in a cool, dry place is the most generic, most seen storage instruction. So just add that if you feel like you want to add some extra text. Otherwise, if it's something that's just like baking powder or something like that, then really it's not going to be a problem for you to add that. Contents ingredients list. I've written if needed, but it is really important to add that. The only reason that I've put if needed is for things like tea. Tea obviously doesn't have really any ingredients other than the tea leaves, so it's more like it's more for if you feel that if it's a particular style of product that you don't need it, such as tea, don't potentially include it. But it is still very important to include. So make sure that you include the ingredients list. Don't be confused by the if needed on this one. I'm sorry that I didn't remove this one in time for you to check it. Recycled cardboard logo is totally if needed. You don't necessarily need it. As I said, back to the back of pack week, if it's something to do with your brand model, that's like you're an ethical and environmentally friendly company, definitely include it. If you're not, don't do it. Volume or weight statement, again, if needed, same as what I was saying with the back of pack week. It's very rare for it to be put on there. The guarantee statement, again, that's to do with we only use the highest quality materials and ingredients when creating this product. Again, if needed. You don't necessarily need it. If you want to add it and you're really lacking in text and you wanted to just sort of include it to try your hand at typesetting for the back of pack, add it in. If you don't want to add a guarantee, I guess you're putting the onus on the consumer to really make sure that they're happy with that. Otherwise, don't worry too much about it. Allergy advice is kind of hand in hand with the contents ingredients list. I've said if needed only because it'll depend on your existing pack, and it'll also depend on your ingredients list. As I said, if you've got a product that doesn't contain any ingredients other than the product itself, so for instance, if it's icing sugar or, as I said before, tea, then the ingredients list isn't necessary, which means the allergy advice may not be necessary. But for all of you who are doing products with complex ingredients lists, you will no doubt have allergy advice needed. So check your existing pack and thoroughly check it to make sure that if it's already on there, just transfer it across to your pack as well. Nutritional info panel. Again, as I said, the if needed only refers to those that are doing tea or products that only have one ingredient and don't necessarily have don't necessarily need any nutritional information because they're kind of like supplementary to a larger process. So as I said, if it's something like flour, you would add that to a cake mix, but by itself, you're not going to eat it. So nutritional information isn't really necessary. But for everybody else, it is totally necessary. So check your pack, refer to your pack. If it's on your pack, add it onto yours as well. Cooking instructions and serving suggestions are exactly the same as I said with regards to the volume or weight statement and recycled cardboard logo. If you need it, add it. If it's not on your existing pack and you don't want to, say, add food styling on the back, or it's actually not a product that requires any cooking instructions, then don't stress, don't add it in. So most of this back of pack, side of pack information will be plucked from your existing pack. Think logically about it. Don't just be like, oh, well, if he said it's only if needed, I won't add it in. Don't be silly about it. Definitely add it in if it's on your existing pack. If it's not on your existing pack and you can't see a logical need for it, then don't add it. But otherwise, definitely use your existing pack as a resource for which of these you'll actually need. And as I said, be totally logical about it in order to include it. So those are your front and back side of pack. So that's all the design-based stuff in terms of your checklist for finished art. Now we're getting into the last finished art section, which is all about cleaning up the actual job itself, just to be nice about how the file's set up. So sometimes this can be for your own good, other times it can be for the printer. It'll just depend on what it is, what element it is under that finished art that matters. So file structure, no unnecessary layers. If we go into this file or one of the existing files and I look up in the top right here where these layers are and I see basic shapes, that's considered an unnecessary layer. If I see something that's like layer 4 and there's no elements on there, that's considered an unnecessary layer. So delete all of the layers that actually aren't on and working towards the design. So if there are elements that you kind of were like playing around with, you had different brand marks off the side of the page, or you had different elements that you tried on the full pack, but they didn't work as well when they were you would just had the front of pack by themselves, but you'd left them off the side. Get rid of them off that layer and get rid of the layers that are totally unnecessary. So you can see here that these two students have stripped them back to only the necessary stuff. So they've got all of their die line elements at the top here. They got their artwork down the bottom. And that's how the pecking order should be. You should have it so that all of your die line elements are on the top. Now I know that it sometimes look really crappy and you can see the glue area there and you can see your green barcode panel and all that stuff. But remember that this is for the printer. The aesthetic quality of your overall layout and stuff you can present in your concept journal and your presentation file to show off in all their glory. But for this file, this finished art file that you're setting up, this is totally to do with finished art. It's for the printer only. So showing those elements are more for the printer's benefit than anything else. So in terms of the unnecessary layers, get rid of them, just so that you know that nothing will be printed on the job and it'll look awkward if it's seen. File structure, artwork layer. So you need to make sure that all of your artwork is on the artwork layer. And you can see that if I toggle on and off this artwork, she's got it all on the artwork layer. The only thing that I said before with regards to her particular artwork is that she needed to include the best before green panel there. But other than that, that would have been a separate layer up here. Other than that, in the glue area that she needed to include, everything else is on the artwork layer. And again, with the other guy here, he's got his background texture there. So he's got his PSD fully laid out in the background there. And that's definitely how you should do it. I think I've got that as the next one here. No, I don't. Oh no, here we go, pixel graphics. So place PSD layers if needed. So if you've done like a giant backdrop that's a texture, or even if your artwork is just a full PSD in the background, my suggestion is to turn it into one background image, because you can see that when I hover over the top of this background stuff, there's all these different elements that this guy's got. And I'll quickly go to the outline mode, and you can see all these boxes there that indicate where pixel graphics are that could have actually just easily been done in one PSD file. So if you're using textures and stuff in the background, make it as one PSD, put it on something like this. So this guy's got his background, maybe just name it placed PSD, and put it down the bottom there so that you've got your artwork, which is all your vector-based graphics and your text, and then you've got your background layer, which is your PSD if you need it. So try and just be logical with it. You can even split it up again if you want to have it so that there's a text layer, and a vector art layer, and a pixel art layer, so that you know where all the things are, so that if you need to go in and you need to replace it, it makes it easy for you, makes it easy for somebody else who's accessing the file who's not you, so it's not just you looking at it for yourself and going, I know what's going on. If you get taken off the job in a studio environment, and they're like, oh look, you've got to move on to this next file, but we'll get somebody else to work on yours as is, they need to access it and know what's going on in the file. So realistically, just make it as clear and concise as you can. Keep your die-line elements up the top, and keep your artwork, including your vector, pixel, and text elements of the design down the bottom. So as I said, just make sure that they're on a separate layer. So you can see there that I've got in brackets text and vector graphics in your artwork layer. So that just makes it nice and easy. Going up to the top here, file structure, no objects off artboard. Again, as I was saying to you before, if you've worked with logos and stuff off the artboard, just so that you don't confuse yourself that they're not part of the actual design, now's the time to get rid of them. You don't need them. If you want to save them for later, put them on another file and save them elsewhere, but this file should be nice and clean, and there shouldn't be anything off the artboard. A good way to check, because sometimes you'll look at it optically and go, oh, I can't see anything off the artboard. Sometimes you'll have forgotten that you actually left one all the way over here somewhere because you were like, I really want it to be out of the way. A good way to check is to just zoom out, so like a decent way, but nothing too crazy. So something like this, unlock all of your layers and just go Command A. Whoops, Command A. Now you can see there that what it's collected off the artboard in this case is actually a PSD that's been clipping masked out. So technically that doesn't count. That's not too bad. That's fine. But if you were to go Command A, and let me just quickly chuck something in there so you get an idea. If you went, if you sort of looked at the job and gone, oh, I can't really see anything, there's nothing on there, and you go Command A, and you see this little tiny thing out the edge, all you need to do is just get it and get rid of it. So at least by zooming out, unlocking all the layers and going Command A, you can see exactly what's on the artboard, what's not. If it's not on the artboard and it's not necessary to what you need, get rid of it. Embellishments. Now, if you're doing something like if you've decided, hey, I want to really add something special to this piece of design, I want to add a foil or an emboss or a gloss varnish or UV varnish or something like that, you'll need to add this as a new spot color. Now, the only reason I've put it in here is because it says if needed. A lot of you probably won't be working with embellishments, at least this time around, but I thought I'd introduce you to it anyway. There's a cool method called scrapbooking. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's basically manually doing what large quantity print process would replicate. So for instance, if you're doing foiling, if you've ever seen an existing pack like a cool funky design and it's got like what looks like silver or gold on it, like actually silver or gold and not just an ink, and it's shining in the light and everything, it's referred to as foiling. Now foiling is very cool in short doses and small doses. And other things such as embossing, like pushing it out, UV spot varnish on a matte surface looks really nice on the right design. But anyway, point is that there's heaps of great embellishments which can add to and contribute to your design should you want to add them. For the purposes of doing this, all you need to do is select the elements that you want to create as your spot color, as your embellishment, and then you need to create a new spot color over the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually choose something in this guy's design that I'm just going to hypothetically create as a spot. Sorry, not a spot. I'm going to pretend like we're creating, say, a gloss varnish or just anything really. I'll pick something when we get to when we get to that section. So for instance, I'm going to choose the title bright and just the text. So you need to select that text. So in this case, obviously, it's just going to be the characters there. Need to copy them, so just Command C, create a new layer, and label that layer whatever the embellishment is. So in this case, I might even go embellishment hyphen UV varnish. Paste it in that place. Now, obviously, in the artwork layer is where our actual title bright is. So the type as the white type. So we're going to leave that there. This is going to be what we'll spot color. So you need to do the same process as you did for all the dye lines. You need to go new swatch. So you're creating a new swatch. You're going to call this one UV, or you could even probably just call it varnish, depending on what you're going to do. If you're going to do a foil or you're going to do something else, you call it what is the embellishment, so what you're actually going to embellish. And then do not print in brackets. Spot color, and just choose a color that hasn't been done before. So in this case, we've used the majority of our colors. I'm going to go with, maybe I'll just go with yellow, just in this case. So we'll do it as yellow. So if I go OK now, there you go. There is the embellishment. And then now that you know what overprinting is, you'll need to make sure that you also click that to overprint fill. And you'll see that in the separations preview, it's popped up as an embellishment. And that's it. That's all you need to do. So you'll just need to indicate it on the print, on the finished art file, to say to the printer that this is going to be UV varnished. The only other thing that you need to do is to give markup to indicate that that is going to be a UV varnish. And to do that, you go to your markup panel, you draw a line from where the actual element is, so where it's being embellished. Use the same color as your, actually no, don't use that, sorry. Use the, you probably need to create a new spot color actually. So you need to go to new swatch, call this one markup. And keep the do not print in there as well. Delete the copy so it just says markup in brackets do not print. Make sure that it's set to a color that you haven't already used, so you might want to use, say, orange. So I've just got it set up as orange. And then draw your line to where your varnish is, or whatever your embellishment is. And just draw a little note to the side that says UV spot varnish to be printed for brand name only. And then you color it in the same color as your as the markup spot color that you just created, and that's it. Now you need to make sure that that markup's on your artboard, so you might need to extend your artboard so that it's got a little bit more to it. But yeah, so you just need to make sure that you set up that UV spot varnish as a markup, and then also as your embellishment as well.